The mansion stood like a monument to perfection, its marble columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. From the wide, polished floors to the crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls, every inch of the house spoke of wealth, taste, and careful curation. Expensive paintings adorned the walls, each telling a story of refinement and sophistication. On the surface, it was the kind of home that made people pause in awe and envy. Jonathan Mitchell strode through the grand hallway with the confidence of a man who had spent decades building an empire. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his frame, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He exuded control, order, and certainty, everything this house seemed to promise. Yet, even as he passed the enormous staircase, a subtle tension lingered in the air, almost imperceptible, like a shadow hiding behind the glint of gold leaf. Evelyn Mitchell sat in the sunlit drawing room, her hands folded neatly on her lap. At 79, her posture remained proud, her gentle features almost regal. But her eyes betrayed the tiny cracks in her mind, fleeting moments of confusion that made her pause mid-thought, fingers hovering over a memory she could not quite grasp. A photograph of her late husband rested on the table beside her, the corners worn, the image faded, yet it seemed to anchor her to a life she could barely remember clearly. "Jonathan," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Have you seen? Has anyone spoken to?" She stopped, uncertainty curling her words like smoke. Linda, ever attentive, hovered nearby, quietly adjusting a cushion behind Evelyn's back. Her face was calm, eyes gentle, almost unreadable, but they held a depth of care that seemed to fill the empty spaces around the old woman. "I'll help you, Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice soft, steady, a quiet rhythm in the otherwise pristine room. "Would you like some tea?" Before Evelyn could answer, the front door opened, and Victoria swept in like a vision from a magazine cover. Her presence was flawless, high heels clicking against the marble, designer dress perfectly pressed, hair shining under the chandelier light. She smiled, dazzling and poised, yet there was something in the way her eyes skimmed over the room, evaluating, calculating, that made the air feel cooler. "Jonathan," Victoria purred, her voice smooth, practiced. She approached him with the kind of perfect grace that earned admiring glances from strangers and acquaintances alike. "You're home early. How was the meeting?" Jonathan returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He nodded briefly. "Productive." Evelyn turned toward Victoria, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to frame a question that had slipped from memory. "Victoria, could you tell me, where is—" Victoria's smile faltered just enough for a sharp edge to appear. "Oh, Mother," she said, a trace of impatience slipping through her carefully curated tone. "Why dwell on things that are gone? Let's not trouble ourselves with the past." Evelyn's lips pressed together, confusion darkening her soft features. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting in uncertainty. Linda moved swiftly, taking Evelyn's hand with a gentle touch. "It's all right," she murmured. "Let's have some tea." "That sounds lovely, doesn't it?" She led the old woman toward the sitting area, her presence like an invisible shield against the chill Victoria had left in the room. Jonathan watched quietly, a growing sense of unease knotting in his chest. Something had shifted, subtly, dangerously, yet he couldn't quite name it. He had spent so long seeing the world through the lens of wealth, reputation, and appearances that he had almost forgotten to notice the quiet truths hiding in plain sight. For a moment, the mansion seemed less like a home and more like a stage, each person performing their part. The charming fiancée, the devoted assistant, the graceful matriarch. And somewhere in the shadows, the real story waited, fragile and unspoken, ready to crack through the polished facade. The morning sunlight spilled lazily through the tall windows of the Mitchell mansion, scattering gold across the marble floors. But even in the glow of the new day, the house seemed quieter, heavier, as if holding its breath for something no one dared speak aloud. Evelyn sat near the window, wrapped in a soft shawl, her gaze lingering on the garden below where roses bloomed in disciplined perfection. The colors were vibrant, almost mocking in their clarity, a stark contrast to the haze that had begun to cloud her own mind. She picked up a photograph of her late husband, tracing the outline of his face with trembling fingers. "I wonder, did he like the roses this color?" she murmured, her voice almost swallowed by the room's stillness. Or was it blue? The blue he always preferred? Linda, who had been arranging a small tray of tea on the table beside her, paused. She looked at Evelyn with the gentle attentiveness that had become second nature. "It was blue, Mrs. Mitchell," she said softly, placing a warm cup in front of her. "Your favorite." Evelyn smiled faintly, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Thank you, Linda. I keep forgetting things, don't I?" "Memory can be tricky sometimes," Linda replied, her voice calm and steady. "But that's why I'm here, to help you remember what matters." The front door opened again, breaking the fragile tranquility. Victoria entered with her usual elegance, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors. She carried herself with the same practiced charm that had impressed so many at the gala the previous evening. But to Evelyn, her presence was like a sudden cold draft. "Mother," Victoria said, her voice sweet but edged with impatience, "I have a meeting to attend soon. Try not to get distracted by old thoughts." Evelyn's hands tightened around the teacup. I wanted to ask about Henry," she whispered, her voice small. Is he coming for tea today?" Victoria's smile froze, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Your husband, Mother? He's been gone for years. Must we talk about the dead again?" The words, though quiet, cut sharper than any loud argument could. Evelyn flinched, confusion clouding her features. She sank slightly in her chair, unsure whether to retreat into silence or to cling to the remnants of memory that still floated in her mind. Linda immediately stepped closer, placing a gentle hand over Evelyn's. "It's all right," she murmured, guiding her to a more comfortable seat. "Let's enjoy some tea together. Why don't we recall some happy moments instead?" Victoria glanced at them, her lips tightening imperceptibly. Her eyes, so accustomed to commanding attention and admiration, narrowed slightly as she assessed the quiet bond forming before her. She said nothing more, instead turning to tidy the room with precise mechanical motions, a queen inspecting her domain rather than a visitor in a home. Jonathan, unaware of the morning's tension, had been delayed at the office. But even in his absence, the house felt charged with unspoken truths. Evelyn's fragile hold on her memories, Victoria's subtle cruelty, and Linda's steadfast devotion. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, bracing for the moments when the delicate equilibrium would finally tip. Evelyn sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her hands and chest. For a fleeting moment, she felt grounded, almost safe. Linda's quiet presence, unwavering and protective, created a space where fear and confusion softened into gentle recollection. She spoke of Henry, not as a ghost of the past, but as a living memory nurtured by love, guided by the hand of someone who truly cared. Victoria, watching from across the room, could not understand it. She was used to admiration, control, and perfection reflected back at her. But here, in the softness of Evelyn's trust and Linda's patience, there was a power she could not command. The day stretched on, the mansion filled with the gentle sounds of pouring tea and quiet conversation. Yet beneath the surface, the tension simmered, unseen but undeniable. The perfect facade had been cracked, and though no one spoke of it yet, the whispers of the past were beginning to shape the house's present, like shadows lengthening with the setting sun. And in those shadows, Jonathan's eventual awakening waited, slow, inevitable, and life-changing. The late afternoon light slanted through the mansion's tall windows, casting long golden shadows across the polished floors. The quiet warmth that had filled the morning was beginning to shift, as if the house itself sensed the arrival of an unspoken truth. Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, her fingers absently tracing the embroidery on a small cushion. Her mind drifted, as it often did, to memories of her late husband. "He always liked the roses by the fountain," she whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. "Didn't he, Linda?" Linda, kneeling beside her to straighten the shawl around her shoulders, smiled gently. "He did, Mrs. Mitchell. You used to plant them together every spring?" Her voice was a steady anchor, soothing Evelyn's confusion and bridging the gap between memory and the present. The serenity shattered with the click of heels against the marble. Victoria entered the room, her movements elegant, almost theatrical, and her smile wide. But behind it lurked a hardness Evelyn could not yet name. "Oh, Mother," Victoria said, her voice honeyed but sharp. "You really should let go of these old stories. They do nothing but weigh you down." Evelyn's fingers froze on the cushion. I just," she faltered. "I was thinking about Henry, about our life together." Victoria's eyes narrowed, her smile slipping. "Mother, enough," she said quietly, but the words were sharp as knives. "You need to stop living in the past. You're frightening yourself with things that are gone. Isn't that right?" Evelyn flinched, shrinking into her chair, the warmth of the room suddenly replaced with a chill she could not shake. Her eyes darted toward Linda, searching for comfort, for someone who would protect her from the sharp edges of Victoria's words. Linda moved immediately, kneeling beside her once more. "It's okay," she said softly, guiding Evelyn's hand into hers. "We'll sit here together. Everything's all right." She poured Evelyn a fresh cup of tea, encouraging her to focus on its warmth rather than the sting of Victoria's words. Victoria watched the scene unfold with a quiet tension in her jaw. She had expected compliance, admiration, perhaps fear, but what she saw instead was quiet resistance. Linda's devotion and Evelyn's trust formed a small fortress Victoria could not breach. She forced a smile, turning to tidy a vase of flowers with precise, controlled movements, as if the act of arranging petals could restore her sense of authority. Evelyn, guided by Linda's calm presence, whispered more memories aloud, stories of laughter, garden mornings, and evenings by the fireplace with her late husband. Each word grounded her, a lifeline stretching back to a past Victoria could not touch. Hours passed with Victoria lingering in the background, her false charm slipping in subtle ways, a sharp glance, a faint sigh, a tightening of her lips when Evelyn's laughter peeked through memories. The mansion, for all its grandeur, seemed to pulse with an invisible tension, warmth and cruelty occupying the same rooms, shadow and light intertwined. Then Jonathan returned unexpectedly, stepping into the house with the familiar confidence that had once made the mansion feel perfectly ordered. But the moment he saw the scene before him, something inside him shifted. Evelyn sat trembling, her hands clasped tightly around Linda's. Victoria's smile remained, but it had lost its shine, revealing the thin mask of control and coldness underneath. Jonathan's eyes widened. He felt a shock, subtle at first, then undeniable. The perfection he had assumed, the charm he had admired in Victoria, was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion. And in contrast, Linda, the quiet, modest woman who had always been there in the background, radiated something far more powerful: loyalty, compassion, and an unwavering courage that no wealth or beauty could match. For the first time, Jonathan truly saw his household for what it was, not a stage of luxury and appearances, but a battlefield of human emotion. And in that realization, he felt the first tremors of a decision that would change everything. The afternoon shadows deepened, stretching long across the marble floors. Victoria remained poised, smiling as if nothing had shifted, yet Jonathan's gaze pierced through the carefully crafted facade. The mansion itself seemed to exhale, the polished surfaces reflecting not wealth, but the stark truths now laid bare. In that room, with Evelyn's frailty, Victoria's cold calculation, and Linda's steadfast devotion, Jonathan began to understand something profound. Appearances could be deceiving, but true character, quiet, selfless, enduring, revealed itself in the shadows behind smiles. The evening had settled over the mansion, and the fading light cast long, muted shadows across the rooms. The once perfect glow of chandeliers now felt harsher, reflecting the cracks that had begun to appear in Jonathan's carefully ordered world. He had spent the drive home turning over what he had seen. His mother, small and vulnerable, grasping Linda's hand as if it were the only anchor in the room. Victoria, smiling with practiced charm, yet radiating a coldness he had never noticed in the early months of their engagement. Jonathan entered the drawing room quietly, his presence unnoticed at first. Evelyn was seated in her armchair, calmer now, the warmth of Linda's attention soothing the anxiety that Victoria's harsh words had stirred. The house was quiet, except for the soft clink of a teacup and Linda's gentle voice recounting a story from Evelyn's past. Victoria looked up, her perfect smile faltering for a microsecond as she saw him. "Jonathan," she said, her voice sweet but guarded, "you're home early." "Everything." He cut her off gently but firmly, his eyes locking on hers. "I saw what happened today, Victoria. I saw how you treated my mother." For a moment, Victoria's practiced composure slipped entirely. Her eyes flicked away, scanning for some excuse. I was just... She should focus on the present, not the past." Jonathan shook his head, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and disappointment. "You didn't just advise. You belittled her. You frightened her." Victoria's smile returned, sharper now, almost predatory. "I won't apologize for helping her stay grounded. I care about your family, Jonathan. I have standards." Jonathan's gaze swept the room, resting on Linda. She stood quietly by Evelyn, her face calm but resolute, the embodiment of a loyalty that required no words or explanations. In that moment, Jonathan understood the truth. Appearances, charm, and social grace meant nothing when measured against genuine care and devotion. He turned back to Victoria. I can't marry someone who sees cruelty as control. Someone whose charm hides indifference and selfishness. I thought I was choosing a partner, but I see now I was choosing an illusion. Victoria's face hardened, her expression twisting with indignation and disbelief. You can't be serious. After all we've planned, all the society events. Jonathan's voice was calm but unyielding. I've never been more serious in my life. He reached out to Evelyn, who looked up at him with tentative hope in her eyes. Linda's hand remained over Evelyn's, steady and protective, and Jonathan felt an overwhelming gratitude for the quiet woman who had held the household together without expectation or reward. Turning to Linda, he said softly, I've been blind, Linda. I didn't see what was right in front of me. You've done more for my mother than anyone could, more than I could have imagined. Thank you. Linda's expression did not change dramatically. She simply nodded, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. It was not pride. It never had been. It was recognition that, finally, Jonathan saw the truth. Victoria left that evening with her carefully crafted smile replaced by a simmering frustration. The mansion, for the first time in years, felt quiet but real. Not a stage of appearances, but a home shaped by loyalty, compassion, and love. Evelyn leaned back into her chair, the tension in her body easing. Jonathan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We'll be okay, he said. Linda and I will take care of you. You're safe. The mansion seemed to exhale along with them, the walls echoing with warmth rather than the hollow gleam of material perfection. And in the evening's soft glow, Jonathan realized that life's real wealth was not measured by status or charm, but by the quiet devotion that protected the ones we love when they were most vulnerable. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows, painting the marble floors with soft gold. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with grandeur or wealth. It was the quiet, unspoken warmth of genuine care, trust, and devotion that now filled every room. Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. She held Linda's hand in hers, fingers entwined like roots anchoring her to the present. Thank you, Linda, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. I don't know what I would have done without you. Linda only smiled, her eyes calm, reflecting a quiet strength that had carried Evelyn through countless moments of fear and confusion. You don't have to thank me, Mrs. Mitchell, she replied. I'm just here. Jonathan watched them from across the room, a sense of peace settling over him. The tension that had haunted the mansion for so long, the unspoken cruelty, the fractured relationships, the illusions of perfection, had finally begun to dissolve. The house, once a stage for appearances, was now truly a home. He knelt beside Evelyn, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Mom, he said softly, you're safe now. And I'm here too. We'll make sure this house is filled with love again, not just things. Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears, but they were tears of relief, of trust restored. She leaned into Jonathan's shoulder, feeling the steady presence of her son and the unwavering devotion of Linda beside her. It was a warmth she hadn't felt in years, a security built not on walls of marble or gold, but on the quiet acts of love that had been there all along. The day unfolded gently. Jonathan spent the morning with his mother, helping her remember small joys and stories from the past. Linda moved gracefully through the house, attending to Evelyn with careful attention, her patience unwavering. There were no arguments, no sharp words, no facades, only the rhythm of genuine connection. Later, they gathered in the sunroom, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses from the garden outside. Evelyn laughed softly at a memory Linda shared, and Jonathan found himself smiling freely for the first time in weeks. The mansion, with all its opulence, no longer felt like a hollow shell. It had become a place of life, warmth, and belonging. Jonathan glanced at Linda, gratitude and admiration filling his gaze. "You've been the heart of this house," he said quietly. "All this time, you've held it together, protected Mom, and kept us grounded. I don't know how to thank you enough." Linda shook her head, her expression serene. "No thanks are needed. Caring for her is what matters. That's enough for me." Evelyn squeezed Linda's hand, and Jonathan felt the invisible bond between them, the quiet loyalty and love that had shaped the household long before he had recognized it. He realized now, fully, that wealth, status, and charm were nothing compared to the kind of devotion that quietly sustains life. The mansion's grand halls, once cold and imposing, now echoed with laughter, soft conversation, and the gentle clinking of teacups. Light poured through the windows, glinting off crystal chandeliers, but it was no longer the artificial shine of wealth. It was a reflection of genuine human connection. For Jonathan, Evelyn, and Linda, life inside the mansion had changed forever. The walls, once hiding tension and cruelty, now radiated warmth, trust, and love. And as Evelyn rested her head against Linda's shoulder, smiling contentedly, Jonathan understood the most important truth of all. The real value of life is not in wealth or status, but in loyalty, care, and love, the kind that leaves an indelible mark on the heart. The mansion, in all its grandeur, had finally become a home.